بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. Alhamdulillah, in our study on the history of the Holy Land, we have reached modern times. We have reached the last 15 years. Last week we spoke about the attack of the Israeli military on the Gaza flotilla of 2010, and we spoke about the aftermath of that attack. And inshallah tonight we will talk about the events of the following year, the events of the year 2011. And one of the biggest events that happened in Palestine that year was the prisoner exchange of 2011, where the Israeli government released more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, some of them that had been held for decades. And these prisoners included men, women, and children. So in 2011, Israel actually released more than 1,000 prisoners. But why? Israel wouldn't release these prisoners without a reason. Why did they release them? What pressured them into releasing more than 1,000 prisoners? So inshallah, we will talk about that tonight. So that happened in 2011, but to understand the events that led up to it, we have to go back a few years to June of 2006. In June of 2006, there was a small group of Palestinian fighters who were under siege and under bombardment, of course, living with drones of the Israeli military in the skies and walls around their homes. They were living under this constant siege and bombardment. These Palestinian soldiers were able to capture an Israeli soldier by the name of Gilad Shalit near the border of Gaza. They captured one Israeli soldier. Now, when this Israeli soldier was captured, Israel called this an act of terror. Israel called the capture of their soldier by the Palestinians an act of terror. But the reality is that this was an act of resistance. They did not capture a civilian, they captured a soldier who was trying to kill them, right? And this is a time of war. So you capture prisoners of war. So they were able to capture this soldier. So the Israeli government tried to make it look like this was an act of terror that was committed by the Palestinian resistance. But the reality was that it was a legitimate act of war, and they captured an Israeli soldier. Now, this man that was captured, this Israeli IDF soldier that was captured, his name was Gilad Shalit, and he was not a high-ranking officer. At that time, he was only 19 years old. He was a tank gunner, a low-ranking soldier. But when he was captured, the Israeli public, and especially the Israeli media, they turned him into this type of national symbol, right? There were posters everywhere in Israel. There were rallies that were held in this man's name. There were songs that were sung about Gilad Shalit, right? And the whole country, they were crying out, bring Gilad home, bring him home, bring him home, right? So they tried to paint him as just some innocent kid who was kidnapped by the big bad Palestinians. But the reality is that he was a soldier. He was a soldier who was trying to kill those Palestinians, but the Palestinians were able to capture him instead. So he was captured in 2006. He was captured in 2006, and for 5 years, from 2006 all the way to 2011, the Palestinians held him as a prisoner of war. And nobody in Israel knew where he was. There were no photos, no proof of life, nothing. But he was held in captivity for a period of 5 years. And Hamas held him in isolation, right? There were no visits. There were no visits from medical personnel or from legal teams or from anyone who wanted to take up his case, any negotiations. No, there were no meetings allowed at all. So he was held in isolation, and there were no visits allowed. And Israel, in order to try to get this soldier back, they tried everything. Over this period of 5 years, from 2006 to 2011, they tried everything to get this guy back. Airstrikes, raids, assassinations, right? They tried all of these things in order to bring him back. But none of it worked, right? And the Palestinians continued to hold this soldier in captivity, Gilad Shalit. Finally, when everything else failed, when Israeli airstrikes, raids, assassinations, operations, all of these things failed, finally, Israel agreed to a prisoner exchange. They were ready to negotiate now. Israel is negotiating with Hamas, right? So they agreed to a prisoner exchange. So the deal that was reached was that Gilad Shalit, this one guy, one IDF soldier, he would be released in exchange for 1,027 Palestinian soldiers. This was the deal that was reached, right? And it was agreed upon by both sides. But the Israeli public started to ask questions that we're going to give up 1,027 prisoners and we're only going to get one guy in return. Is it worth it? The Israeli public started to ask questions. Is this worth it? Why is the life of one coward IDF soldier worth over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, right? And even within the Israeli public sphere and within the Israeli media, people started discussing this. Is Gilad Shalit, is he a hero or is he a coward? That he is willing to allow more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners to be released so that he can be safe. Right? Is this man a hero? Are you going to call him a hero or are you going to call him a coward? The Israelis started speaking like this, right? Now, Israeli soldiers, they try to paint themselves. They want the public to believe that they are brave lions, right? That's the way they try to paint themselves. But they're really not fooling anybody. They're really not fooling anybody. But they want the world to see them or to perceive them as extremely brave and courageous, fearless soldiers. But the reality is, and pretty much everyone knows this now, they have been exposed time and time again. The reality is that the IDF, they are the biggest cowards in the world. They're not brave at all, right? And it's even known that these soldiers of the IDF, they literally wear diapers in combat. This is something that's known. They wear diapers in combat because they are known to soil themselves out of fear when they come face to face with Palestinian fighters, right? So they're not brave at all. They are people of cowardice, right? They're people who have extreme fear in these types of situations. But that's not the image that the Israeli government wants the people to see. The Israeli government tries to make the perception of their soldiers as people of courage and people of bravery. But this man, Gilad Shalit, he shattered that image, right? He shattered that image because when he was captured, he surrendered. His tank was ambushed. 2 of his comrades were killed and he surrendered, and he didn't die fighting, and he didn't even get off any shots on the Palestinians, right? He fell very easily and then he surrendered and he was captured. So there was no bravery involved when he was captured. He was in a position where he easily surrendered. So this went against the narrative that the Israeli government wants to paint regarding its soldiers. So it really kind of messed up the image of the whole IDF at that time. So Gilad Shalit, he surrendered, he lived, he was taken as a captive, and this did not fit the story that the Israelis wanted to tell. All right. So he was kept in captivity for a period of 5 years. Israel tried whatever they could to get him back. They tried violence, they tried airstrikes, they tried assassinations, but none of this worked, right? So finally, they sat at the negotiating table with Hamas, and they came to a deal that Hamas would release Gilad Shalit, and Israel would release these 1,027 Palestinian soldiers. So this was agreed upon in 2011, and the deal went through. The deal went through. Gilad Shalit was released, and Israel released more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. But underneath all of the celebration that then took place, after Gilad Shalit was released after 5 years in captivity, of course there were big celebrations in the streets, right? There were celebrations, but there was a lot of uneasiness amongst the people as well. A number of Israeli citizens, and especially those who belong to the political right, they called this deal a humiliating deal. They said, like, look, we were humiliated in this deal. We released more than 1,000 of them, and in exchange we got one guy, right? They felt humiliated by that deal. And they were saying, look, we released more than 1,000 terrorists. I mean, these are the Israelis speaking, right? They consider all of these Palestinians terrorists. So they said, we released 1,000 terrorists for one coward soldier. What a humiliation. And then they started speaking amongst each other. The Israeli public, they started discussing regarding this soldier, Gilad Shalit. Did he do enough to resist? Why was he captured so easily? Why did he surrender so easily? Right? He's not a hero. He's a coward. So this chatter and this talk started to go on in the public sphere in Israel, right? So this soldier came home. Gilad Shalit, he came home, but not victorious. He did not come home to a hero's welcome, right? When he came out, he became very withdrawn. He didn't look like a war hero. Rather, he looked like a coward, because that's what he was, right? So he did not receive a hero's welcome. Rather, the people considered him to be a disgrace and a coward. And he became a symbol of something that made Israel very, very uncomfortable. He became a symbol of Israeli cowardice and fear, right? So it really messed up the image that Israel wanted to paint regarding their military and regarding their soldiers. So this guy, Gilad Shalit, he ruined their plans, right? All right, so after he was released, after Gilad Shalit was released, he pretty much faded away from public life. He did give a few interviews. He worked for a while as a sports journalist, right? But after that, he mostly disappeared. Because being perceived as a coward, it makes a person want to retreat. This person does not want to be in the public eye, because he knows what the people are saying about him, and he knows how the people are looking at him. So he basically retreated from the public eye. And when he did appear on TV, initially he did appear for some interviews after he was released. Whenever he appeared on TV, people didn't see him as a fearless warrior, right? Someone who was in captivity for 5 years and he remained strong and he was released. What a hero, what a fearless warrior. No, that's not how the people saw him. They saw him as a nervous, anxious coward, struggling to adjust now to a normal life after his release. And that's when it really hit the Israeli society. It really caused a shift in the perception of the Israeli military. The so-called, they like to call themselves the strongest army in the Middle East. But this incident proved that they could be shaken. Not necessarily by tanks or rockets, but by their own cowardice and their own fragility. The cowardice of one man, it shook their whole army, and it shook and destroyed the image of their whole army in front of their nation and in front of the world. So Gilad, Shalit, he basically became a mirror. He became a mirror of Israeli society and the Israeli military, and he reflected Israel's deepest fear, that beneath all of the armor and beneath all of the checkpoints and the walls, there's not strength, rather there is cowardice and fragility in the heart of these soldiers. And Gilad was a reminder to the Israelis that their own soldiers could be captured and could be broken. They could be captured and they could be broken, and they could be used as bargaining chips by those who they claim to dominate. The Israelis, they claim that they have complete domination over the Palestinians. But look what happened here. The Palestinians used one Israeli soldier as a bargaining chip to get what they wanted from the Israelis, to get the release of more than 1,000 prisoners. So this proved that the Israeli system could be broken by those whom they claimed that they dominated, by the Palestinians themselves. So when this deal finally came through, when it went through in October of 2011, it was really a big deal, right? It was really a big deal. One Israeli soldier for 1,027 Palestinian prisoners, men, women, teenagers, elders. Some of them spent years, some of them spent decades in cells. One of those who was released in this deal was Yahya Sinwar. Yahya Sinwar, rahmatullahi alayh. He had been imprisoned by the Israeli government since 1988. Since 1988 to 2011. That's 23 years in jail. But while he was in jail for 23 years, while Yahya Sinwar was in jail for 23 years, he learned Hebrew in jail, right? He learned Hebrew in jail. He studied his captors. And he basically turned his imprisonment into a period of education. So when he actually came out, he rose to prominence, and he actually became the leader of Gaza, right? And Yahya Sinwar, he was killed just last year in the current war in Gaza. He was killed just last year in 2024 in battle. He was killed in battle. And even his enemies admitted that he died fighting, not begging, right? He didn't surrender like Gilad Shalit did. Rather, he died fighting. He died fighting. He died with dignity and with honor. Rahmatullahi alayh. That was just last year. Also, from those prisoners who were released in that deal of 2011 was a man named Nail Barghouthi. Nail al-Barghouthi. And he was the longest serving prisoner from the Palestinians in the Israeli jails. He had been imprisoned in 1978. He was imprisoned in 1978, and he was one of those who was released in this deal in 2011. So he was in jail, held captive for 33 years. 33 years, right? And then he was released in this deal in 2011. But he was re-arrested 3 years later in 2014, right? So the Israelis, they made this deal, but then they tried their best to go back on that deal and recapture some of those prisoners that they had agreed to release with no reason. There was no new reason to arrest them, but they wanted to get as many of them back as they could. So they, as they are known to do, they went back on their promises and they went back on the deals that they made. So Nail al-Barghouthi, he was released in 2011 as part of this deal, but he was re-arrested in 2014. And from 2014 to earlier this year, up to February of 2025, he remained in prison. And in February of 2025, he was exiled to Egypt. They decided to release him, but not allow him to stay in Palestine. They released him, but they exiled him to Egypt. And he didn't want to go. He was ready to stay in jail. He did not want to leave Palestinian land. He did not want to leave Palestinian land, and he initially rejected the idea of being released in exchange for exile abroad. But he was thinking about the people of Gaza, and he said that if I had refused to be exiled, then the price would have been paid in blood and suffering upon the people of Gaza. They would have taken out my refusal upon the people of Gaza, and they would kill more people if I refused to be exiled. And that is the only reason why he agreed to it. And he said, I had opposed exile. I had opposed exile. Why? Because our very presence on our land, the land of Philistine, our very presence on this land, in the place of our birth, just our presence on this land in and of itself is an act of resistance to the occupation. Right? Even if we're in jail, as long as we're on this land, just being on this land is an act of resistance. So he did not want to be exiled. Rather than have freedom in Egypt, he would rather remain imprisoned on the land of Philistine. Right? But because he felt that if he refused their offer, the consequence of that would be more blood of the people of Gaza would be spilled. That is the only reason why he accepted the offer, and he was exiled to Egypt. So he's in Egypt now. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect him and preserve him. And his release and his exile was just done earlier this year in February of 2025. But he stayed in prison for a long time. Initially 33 years, from 1978 to 2011. Then they rearrested him in 2014, and he was released in 2025. So he spent, 44, close to 45 years of his life in prison. Right? These are the hardships that these people have gone through. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them relief. But this deal, the 2011 prisoner exchange deal, it really shattered the myth of Israeli control. It proved that the Israelis, they don't have the complete control that they think that they have. For so many decades, the IDF, they would boast that we never leave a soldier behind. They like to paint themselves as people of such great values and morals and ethics, and they say we never leave a soldier behind, right? But for 5 years, they could not bring even this one worthless coward home, right? And in the end, they had to release more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners to get this guy home. 5 years worth of airstrikes, raids, intelligence operations, targeted assassinations, but nothing. They were not able to get him back. And in the end, how did they get him back? They had to sit down at the table with Hamas, and they had to negotiate with those that they called terrorists, even though they proudly like to say, we do not negotiate with terrorists, right? They say we do not negotiate with terrorists, and they call Hamas terrorists, but they had to sit at the table with Hamas and negotiate with Hamas in order to get this one guy back. They couldn't do it on their own, right? So it really shattered the illusion of Israeli dominance and Israeli control, because they could not win the freedom of their soldier by force. They couldn't do it by force. They had to bargain for it, and they had to negotiate for it, right? And that destroyed their pride. It really broke their pride, right? So alhamdulillah, this was something that was good. It showed them that they do not have the control that they thought that they had. So for the Palestinians, alhamdulillah, this exchange, it was a big deal. It was not just an exchange, rather it was a type of vindication. It showed that the resistance is effective. It showed that the resistance is effective. Not pleading with America and pleading with the West and begging the UN for help. That never worked. But showing real resistance, right? That is something that was effective, alhamdulillah, and this proved it, right? And it shows that the occupier only listens when his comfort is shaken, right? So this is something that disturbed the comfort of the Israeli military that such a thing could happen. So it was really, really a big deal. And this happened in October of 2011, and it really changed the perception. It even changed the perception that Israelis had regarding their own military, right? And it really shattered the myth and the illusion of Israeli control and dominance. Right? So those were some of the main events that happened in the year 2011. And inshallah, we'll pause there. And next week, inshallah, we'll continue with more of the events that took place in the years that followed. We'll speak about that next week, bi'idhnillah. Jazakumullahu khayran wa barakallahu feekum. Wallahu alam wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.